Well, it gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome not one, but two people to the Mr. Barton Maths podcast this episode. We've got everyone's returning favourite, Ollie Lovell, and we've got our new guest on the show, Mark Dowley, and we're going to be talking all things classroom management. Before we introduce Mark, just over to you, Ol. Now, Ollie, this is the first time we've spoken since we've come back from our I'm going to say global tour, although specifically Australian tour. I've not seen you for a while. I've been missing you a little bit.
Likewise,
I don't know if the feelings...
likewise.
Yeah, okay, you had to say that. That's good. Just a quick reflection on the tour, because people will be wondering how it went, and then we can tease our kind of getting back together for our monthly podcast. Go on, give us a bit of something there, Ol.
It was great. I mean, one of the most interesting moments for me was right at the start when we kind of met each other for the first time. It's always, do you shake hands? Do you hug? It's always you're always a bit unsure. I was like, is Craig going to be taller than me? Am I taller than him? Craig, you're definitely taller than me. You're like what are you, 6'2"?
6'2".
Yeah, so I lost that battle. And that was a big, and then you basically just outshone me for the rest of the tour and made me look like a bit of a mug. So
Oh, God.
apart from that, I think you delivered a lot of value to the people of Australia, the math teachers of Australia. And I learnt a lot from you as well, Craig, through your presentation. So yeah, I loved it. And you're not a bad bloke as well. I didn't get sick of you over the 2 weeks.
That's good news. Yeah, I had a great time. So we'll definitely, it was brilliant. I learned loads, and we'll do a little kind of CP. I think I learned a lot from you in terms of delivering effective CPD. So we'll perhaps do a bit of a CPD debrief at the start next time we get together for our monthly pods.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, amazing. Now, on to you, Mark. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to work with Ollie Lovell.
Yeah, g'day Craig, g'day Ollie, thanks for having me. I'm a teacher nerd. I'm a mathematics and PE teacher by trade. Held a few different leadership roles in schools and do some stuff around some not-for-profits around behaviour and engagement of students as well. First came across Ollie through his podcast about the same time I came across yours, Craig, which is almost 7 or 8 years ago now. And we met first at a Research Ed conference they held in Melbourne about that same time. We were both speakers and we met there, and then I tried to get him to come and work at our school for a couple of years. And after about 2 or 3 years of trying, I finally got him across. And then we shared an office together and just loved talking all things education and got along pretty well. How does that sound?
Is this Brighton Grammar?
Yeah, Brighton Grammar here in Melbourne.
Nice, fantastic. Okay, brilliant stuff. Right, well, I think we're going to just dive straight into it. So we've got a book about classroom management, and first question's coming to you all, and I've got a little twist on this question. This is hot off the press, this, right? So my original question to you was going to be, why write a book on classroom management when there are already so many of them out there, which is definitely true. But I've just got off a conversation yesterday with Adam Boxer, and I asked him a similar question, although about a different area. And he had a really interesting take on this. He says, every time somebody does something new or writes something that adds to the field, it's essentially an implied criticism of everything else that's come before it. Because otherwise, why would be the point in writing anything, right? Because it's already out there. So I wonder, what is your implied criticism of all the other classroom management books that are out there? Why bother writing another one?
Cool. First of all, let me make an implied criticism of Adam Boxer's comment, and that is that I would say that every additional book that's written that's good is an implied criticism. I think a lot of books are being written these days because people just want to have a book, and there's a lot of recycling of ideas that goes on. And not necessarily in a way that packages it up in a way that's adding value. So that would be my implied criticism of the implied criticisms. But I actually do agree in many ways with that, and I'm happy to talk about how I think our book does a few things effectively for teachers. So first of all, I've got to tip my hat to mainly Bill Rogers and Tom Bennett, because I know both Mark and I have learned the vast majority of the kind of concrete content around classroom management from those two absolute legends of the field. However, me digesting and coming to terms with the work that both of those gentlemen have put out was quite an involved process. It involved reading books in depth over many hours and then really trying to get to the heart of it through a podcast interview with them. And I guess Mark and I realized that a lot of teachers just don't have that amount of time, which is why, we called it the Classroom Management Handbook. It's like pretty small, 100 and something pages. So we really wanted something that was like shorter and more to the point, and particularly for time poor teachers and particularly grads. But I know lots of teachers at varying levels of the career have found it useful as well. It's something you can pick up and really be successful with. And the way that we've structured it, you can actually just be like, oh, I'm struggling with, like, you could be in a classroom, you think, oh, I need to move a kid, look at the index and be like, how to move a student, go to the script, which is like a 2-page spread, and read it. So one thing is shorter, more to the point. Another thing is like clearer worked examples. We all know that novices really benefit from worked examples. A lot of previous work in classroom management has been done in kind of a narrative way, which I think can be really good for helping people to kind of really feel the lessons. But novices just need worked examples. They need to say, tell me what to say and how to say it. And so we've been really cool with work examples. We've used scripts. A third difference is that we've made a real purposeful emphasis on deliberate practice. So within the book, we actually say, don't just read this book, actually take the scripts, adapt them, and practice them. And I think that that's something that, I mean, you were talking before about, our work together and trying to improve our collective PD session, Craig. I think that one of the big things I've learned in recent years is basically if you want to get good at something, you need to practice it. So that's another one. So they're the kind of three main things, like shorter and more to the point, as well as being better structured, really clear worked example, and a purposeful emphasis on deliberate practice that we think this book adds to this field of classroom management.
Yeah, it's interesting this. So just before I come to you, Mark, I'll give you a bit of behind the scenes here, right? So I knew Ollie was writing a book a couple of years ago, whenever it was. And I thought, oh, this will be great to kind of chat to Ollie about it. But I'm thinking, what happens if it's crap? This is going to be awkward, right? If he sends me something and it's essentially like a poor version of Tom Bennett's or something, this is going to be a painful conversation. I'm going to have it. I'm going to have to record the podcast and then pretend it got lost or something like that. But genuinely, I found it a really novel approach. So my two favourite things about it are the index, as you said. I think it's the massively underrated part of a book is an index. And ironically, my first book, How I Wish I Taught Maths, doesn't have an index. So I'm saying this as somebody who's learned from his mistakes here. But particularly from a behaviour management book standpoint, to have an index is a really, really good thing. But the scripts, and we're going to really take a deep dive into the scripts. I think the scripts are absolutely superb. So yeah, I think you're definitely adding something to the field that I'd certainly not seen before. So that's fantastic. Right, Mark, let's go to you. So traditionally on the show, every time I have a new guest on, I ask them for a favourite failure, something that didn't go according to plan, but you learned something from it. So with obviously the subject of your book, let's make that a bit more laser focused and go for a behaviour management or classroom management favourite failure, some kind of howler, something that's gone bad in the past for you, but you've learned something valuable from the experience.
Oh yeah, geez, it's hard to think of just one, but the one in front of mind is my first ever class. I think we all remember our first ever class as a teacher, and I remember going in there, and what I remembered from my teacher training was that you needed to make classes fun. And so I was in like rural Australia, a bunch of 15-year-olds, practical physical education class. Like, this is going to be the most fun class these kids have ever seen. And so they had like 4 different activities. They had like a cricket, a basketball, and football, and they'd rotate around do all these activities, have the best time. Pretty much all self-directed by the students. But as I was just right at the start, I was explaining what to do. Like, some of the kids weren't listening. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. They'll figure it out once they get out to the different stations. And then as the class started, like, very quickly it was unraveling. Like, kids were hitting the tennis balls over the fence. They were kicking the footballs at the basketball ring. And like, as a teacher, I didn't really know what to do. So I started like shouting at kids. I'm like, stop that. You get out over there. And it was a disaster, literally saved by the bell. Like, saved by the bell, kids go off laughing. In my defense, I think they had fun. They didn't learn a single thing that I wanted them to. The bit I remember most is I sat down at the end of the lesson, like, clearly dejected, disappointed in my life choices to being a teacher. And there's always like one great kid in every class. I was sitting on the side of the hall, like, head down, clearly dejected, and this 15-year-old girl walks up to me and goes, "Oh, it's okay, mister. It wasn't that bad." I'm like, oh, the kids were trying to cheer me up after
Yeah,
class.
yeah.
That's when you know it's gone horribly, horribly wrong. So that has definitely stuck with me the last 20 years.
And what was your kind of takeaway from that, Mark? Was that the moment where you think I've got to nail this classroom management, or was there any? Yeah, what came out of it from you there?
I realized that one, that it's really hard, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I
Yeah.
went back to my mentor teacher, who recommended Bill Rogers' book, and that started me on this whole journey of behavior management stuff. But yeah, just made me realize how hard it was.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had reflecting when I was reading your book and prepping for this interview. I had an interesting experience that, looking back, I don't know whether this is the right way or the wrong way. Right. So my first school was a state school over here, so not a private or fee paying one, but it was in quite an affluent area. It was in Formby, just outside of Liverpool for UK listeners. And the kids were great, right? But I knew nothing different. So you'd have like one or two ropey kids maybe in a class, but the vast majority were fine. And the parasocial norms meant actually they towed the line pretty quickly. And I taught there for 5 years. And it meant I could really hone my teaching because the behaviour wasn't such a big deal. And then I moved school, and I thought, what the hell have I moved into here? So the school I moved to, I'd never seen kids like it in my life, and I had a similar experience to you. One of my first lessons was with a year 10 class, so 14 and 15-year-olds. I think they'd had something like 13 maths teachers up to that point because nobody stuck around. And I was trying to teach them a lesson, whether it's trigonometry or something. And there's a kid stood on a table. There's a kid throwing a chair. There's a kid just like having a chat, ripping up paper. And one girl, it was a girl as well, just kind of looking at me. And you could see she just felt so sorry for me. And I thought, you shouldn't be the one, you shouldn't be feeling sorry for me. This isn't the way this dynamic's going. And I'd never had to think about behavior before. And like looking back, I don't know whether it would have been better to go to that school first and nail my behavior and then focus on my teaching, because the realization I made is that I can't teach. Like I thought, I cannot teach these kids. And I had that feeling for 2 to 3 months. And it took me a long time to not even master behavior, but kind of stumble my way through to try and get these kids back online. But the realization I made from that is, unless it's explicitly taught, classroom management strategies that the teachers have, you're going to come a cropper a lot of the time. And that was 6 years into my career. And I nearly gave up at that point. I thought, what the hell is going on here? And I just think teachers who get that in their first year, they're potentially screwed. I don't know if you've any reflections on that, or reflections on Mark's story, or anything from your past.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is a massive challenge when you face a class like that, because you feel like you can't do your job.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, because I had an impression you were going to ask me a similar question to what you did, Mark, and I was thinking about my doozy. Is that what you called it?
Howler, but I like doozy. We'll
Howler.
go with that. Go with
Australia.
that.
In Australia, we say
doozy.
doozies.
All right, we'll have it.
There you go. I actually think that my most challenging year behaviourally was probably the last one I taught. And this is when I'd gone like quite part-time at school. And so I was seeing my class. I was actually sharing a class with Mark, and they liked Mark a lot more than me for understandable reasons. But I wasn't seeing them very, very frequently at all. And so I just wasn't really I was kind of like that guy who came in every now and then, and who wasn't the main teacher. And so, like, why would we listen to this bloke? And, this was after we'd written the Classroom Management Handbook.
Right, okay.
I think probably the year that we were actually releasing it. And I was like, why can't I get these kids to listen to me? I have literally written a book on this topic. So hopefully that's encouraging to people at home, to know that, even if you have a really solid mental model of these principles, sometimes it can be a real challenge. That being said, I think I did a lot better than if I didn't have any of the strategies. Probably would have been an absolute dog's breakfast if that was the case. But I wasn't able to teach in the way that I felt I'd been able to teach in the past, and that was hard for me. And so I guess that really brought home, one of the principles we talk about in the book, which is the role of relationships, which is kind of a bit cliche and everyone knows the importance of it. But really, that is foundation, as well as all the kind of technical strategies that we can talk about today too.
Fantastic, and we'll dig in a little bit later on when we come to do reflections, just about the challenge that teachers have got to nail subject knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, and also potentially behaviour knowledge, and what schools can perhaps do to ease the burden of at least one of those. Okay, that's great, mate. Fantastic. Right. So, structure of the book, as I say, I'm genuinely a big fan of this book. Listeners will know I don't. This is bad, but I'll just say it anyway. I don't have many authors on these days because it's quite rare that I get sent a book that I think this has got something really new and really useful to say. But this one, I really thought that was the case. I like the structure. So we start off with these 10 principles. We're not going to go through all 10, and then we dive into the as you say, the worked examples or the scripted phase. So I've picked out 3 of these principles that I wanted to discuss a bit further because they're not things that I've spoken about before. So I hope listeners check out the book to get your full 10, but these were the 3 that really caught my eye. So I'm going to come back to you, Mark, for this first one. Master your own behaviour to influence others. What do you mean by that, and why is that important?
Yeah, the understanding behind that is that as teachers, we can only control our own behaviour. Like, we can't physically control the students, like grab them and move them or make them stop talking. So the only tools we have are our tone, our voice, our posture. And so managing all of those is actually the skill of behaviour management rather than trying to control students. And that's really important if teachers start to feel frustrated or angry or those type of things. We always invite teachers to come back to the idea of, what do my students need me to be right now? Because quite often the answer to that is a calm, consistent person in front of the room. Because when teachers feel like it's out of their hands, that's when you can resort to shouting or sarcasm or some of the less effective behaviour management tools that we see.
Yeah, it's a biggie, right? It's one of those that, I mean, it's on the one hand, it's quite obvious that's got to be the case. Doing it is a whole other question. One thing I wanted to dig in a bit more with this is this idea that you highlight of the difference between professional and personal. The question I had here is, I want you to talk about the distinction, but what I'm also the mistake I think I've gone wrong on both sides of this. So I've had certain classes where I'm essentially, the way I spoke to them was how I'd speak to my mates, which is not ideal at all. And these typically would tend to be the older classes, the kind of sixth forms, so 17 and 18-year-olds. And I was saying things in those classes, which if that was recorded, I'd be cancelled a lot long ago. That's a bit too personal. But then also there's the danger where, you're a bit too professional. You're almost kind of robotic, and it's much harder to develop that relationship because kids don't see you as anything else but a teacher, and they perhaps don't have that human connection. So I'd like to talk, Mark, a bit more about this distinction between professional and personal. But also, do you think, are there any generalizations? Does it change? Like, do you become more that personal side the older kids get, the older kids that you teach, or the longer you have a class, does the way that you are with them change a little bit? Are there any trends that you've picked up there? So just over to you, Mark, on that one.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we wrote the book was for those graduate teachers. And so it's, what are the things you just want your first year teachers to know? And Ollie and I, and I'm sure you have too, Craig, coached a lot of teachers, particularly new teachers. And the trend that we see a lot is teachers come into class and they want to be cool and friendly and popular. Yeah. And that works really well day 1 and 2. But then by the end of the first term, they're pulling their hair out because the kids aren't listening to them, and the kids don't respect them because they're going through that friend versus teacher phase. Sounds like something you've seen before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and done it as well. Not just seen it, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, I did the same thing. And so one of the other parts of it is we're trying to, teaching is a very personal thing. Like, our identity is attached to being our teacher. The way we teach is often an extension of our beliefs and values that we have as a person. And so when students are misbehaving, it often feels like a personal attack. They're like, oh, the kids are misbehaving because they don't like me, Mark Dowley. It's so unfair. But if you could just separate it a bit, the kids are just stuffing around for their mathematics teacher or their PE teacher or whoever it is at that point in time. So rather than taking it as a personal offense, like, take it as, look, they're misbehaving for a teacher. What does a good teacher do in this situation? Be calm, be consistent, and walk that line of, we do need to build relationships and get to know our students, but we also need to have, use the phrase like warm and strict, kind but fair, all those type of things.
Yeah, again, it's such an important thing. Yeah, and I'm bad at this. I've spoke to Ollie about this over the years. I take criticism really badly, Mark. Right, it's one of my big character flaws, and it was particularly the case when I was teaching full time. If a kid was misbehaving, I take that as a personal thing. But you're
Wow.
absolutely right. The key there is to separate it and think, no, they're misbehaving for their maths teacher. They're not necessarily misbehaving for me as a person. Yeah, really important distinction. I like that. But Ollie, let's dig into this a bit further, because we've all been there. You're knackered, particularly if you've got young kids. You've not had a great sleep. Something's not gone so well in your personal life. You enter that room with emotions flying around left, right, and centre. How do you manage that? Because I've certainly fallen into that trap before, where my personal life and stuff has stepped into that classroom, and that's never ever gone well. What do we do there, Ol?
Yeah, so this ties back, just to remind listeners, we're still kind of in that principle of master your own behavior to influence others. And if kids can they're kind of like animals. If they can smell your fear, you
That's
know,
it.
they'll pile on and you can really be in trouble. The first time that I kind of noticed this, I had one class that I was struggling with a little bit, well, quite a lot actually, if I'm honest. And I noticed that as I started to go to class, this was like after a couple of weeks that I've been struggling with them, on my way to class, my heart rate would start to go up.
Yeah, yeah,
I was anticipating like a fight,
yeah,
essentially, like my
yeah.
body was preparing itself. And I thought, gee, this is interesting. This is an issue, and this is not actually putting me in a position to authoritatively and confidently teach this class.
Yes.
And so we thought, what are some of the things that teachers can do in these scenarios? So it's kind of a two-part thing that we advise in the book. The first part is use video in your class. Actually video yourself. And the
Oh,
second
right.
part, and the second part is plan your regulation. So I'll go through each in turn. So one of the challenges of teaching, and particularly when you're in that heightened kind of mindset, I guess, and physical kind of disposition, you actually really struggle to see what's happening in the classroom. You kind of almost get this tunnel vision thing, which I'll come back to in a moment. And so by setting up a video, and I did this myself with this particular class, I was able to watch it back later when I was home, when I was relaxed, and go, oh, I could see what's happening. Exactly the same thing happened 3 or 4 times throughout the lessons. And lesson, it was like kid A said something to kid B shouted something out. I reacted to kid B blamed kid A, like, whatever the
Yeah.
pattern was. It's just the same thing happened 4 times in the same lesson. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, I can just address that by doing X, Y, Z. And it helped me to really have perspective on the scenario that was almost impossible to get when you're kind of in the melee of the classroom in that moment. So that's the first thing. Get a video camera in your classroom and video yourself so you can get that perspective. Once you've got that, it's really valuable to plan your regulation. So one of the, and this comes back to that idea of deliberate practice as well. One of the challenges is, as soon as you get into that kind of headspace and that physiological response, whatever natural reaction you have is not going to be the most productive natural reaction, right? So what you actually want is you want to have something planned that you have rehearsed that you can deal with or that you can bring out. So things like just practicing standing tall, because your physiology kind of influences your mental state. Take a deep breath. You might like to kind of smile or even just relax your face. So this is just kind of going through some physical kind of almost meditative practices. You might like to have a mantra that you say to yourself. Something, it could be anything. This too, all things shall pass. This too shall pass. Or it might be something more positive, like, I'm learning through this experience, whatever, something that works for you. And then a really good one that kind of helps you get out of that tunnel vision. Because like I said, when you're stressed, you can get into that tunnel vision. And often what I've found my eyes doing is they go between the students who are kind of causing issues. So you kind of almost don't see anything else in the classroom. You see student A, they're shouting out. Student B, they're punching another kid. Student C, they're throwing their pen, whatever. And you're just focusing on this. And so it's like the whole class is playing up. But actually, you can systematically just look at the students one by one and just say on task, on task, on task, off task, on task, off task. And it actually helps you. Firstly, it's like almost a robotic thing that kind of calms you down. But secondly, it enables you to actually get a a representative picture of what's happening in the classroom. And if you do all these things, stand tall, deep breath, have a smile, repeat your mantra, on task, off task, on, suddenly you kind of change the physiology and you understand, it's not like every kid is throwing a chair at the window. There are 3 kids doing something and I can actually see what's going on and the other kids are trying to learn. So these 2 things in tandem, getting the perspective through video and making a plan and actually executing it, can put you in a much better position to break some unproductive habits and patterns that you may have unconsciously taken on in a stressful classroom.
Oh, I love it all. I love anything practical here. This is superb. So let's just reflect on those very briefly. Video is always an interesting one, right? We talk about this when we talk about coaching. Video is probably the most powerful medium where you can reflect on your practice, but video has negative connotations for some teachers. There's the technological aspect of, physically setting it up at the back of the class, potentially miking yourself up, although, phone's audio is pretty good, but then also not many people like seeing themselves on screen, and then you've got to get the permissions potentially off the pupils and all that, blah, 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 blah. We often talk, when we talk about coaching, the power of kind of audio only, because again, it's just very easy for the teacher just to leave their phone on the desk and turn on the audio recorder. Do you think there's any mileage in that? Obviously, you're not going to get the full range of information, or I can see from your face, you're not a big fan here. Well, what do you think?
Yeah.
Is it better than nothing or not?
I mean, yeah, it's probably better than nothing, but I mean, a lot of the behavior that's going on is not, you're not going to be able to, well, it's what kids are doing, not what they're saying or sounds they're making. So yeah, I think you're getting maybe 5% of the benefit through that approach.
So we've got to go for video. No, rather you say that. That's good. Love it. And then the 2 things I really like what you said there in the second part of this is firstly just those practical physical things that you can do, which again maybe sounds small, but you start putting those together and do those regularly, they're going to have an impact. They're standing up tall, they're taking the deep breath, the mantra, and so on. And then the bit I particularly love, which I need to get better at, and this goes back to something we've spoken again about before, is focusing more on the majority who are doing what you want them to do than the minority who aren't. And it's so easy to get that tunnel vision, as you say. So I love that. All some real practical things there. And Mark, just before I move on to the next bit, anything you'd like to add to that? No pressure at all, but I just want to give you the opportunity in case you do.
Probably just that from a broader perspective, a couple of challenges in Australian education at the moment are like student behaviour in the classroom and teacher attention. And these 2 things are very closely related, and talking through some of the really practical strategies that Ollie's talking about there and some of the things we'll get to later in the podcast, I think these tools can go a long way towards keeping teachers in the profession, as well as making sure students are engaged and focused on learning. So this is a big win-win if teachers can get this stuff right.
Perfect. And the only thing I wanted to add there is, again, just as a passing comment, I guess it would also help you stop in taking those feelings from the classroom home with you as well, hey, because that's something I really, really struggle with. Not only was I taking my emotions from home into the classroom, then my emotions from the classroom were coming home with me. But if I can do some of these exercises we've talked about, and particularly Mark, if we can do this idea of separating my persona in the classroom from my persona out of it, then hopefully that distinction is going to help the mental well-being when I return home. So really, really powerful stuff. Love that. Okay, let's move on to the second principle. Now, you know what? When I saw this, I thought, no, come on, because I see this written so many times, this idea of treat behaviour as a curriculum. I think as a profession over the last 5 years, we've become curriculum obsessed. It's the buzzword, everything, knowledge-rich curriculum. And I've heard this bandied around, treat behaviour as a curriculum. And the problem is, there's a real danger that just becomes so abstract, it becomes absolutely meaningless. So I almost thought, forget this. But then I started reading it, I thought, no, actually, there's something valuable here, because you're not doing the abstract, you're doing the practical. So Ollie, let me come to you. What do you practically mean by treat behaviour as a curriculum, and how have schools that you've seen get this right achieved it?
Good question. One of the biggest mistakes we can make is just assume that kids know what it means to behave. Like, if we say behave yourself, like quite a lot of students don't actually know what that means, and the norms that they have at home and the norms they've experienced within schools previously is like, I have no idea what you mean, sir. So the first thing is we, for ourselves, need to know what we want students to do. So if we're talking about an entry routine, when kids walk, and this is kind of the level of detail that we get to in our chats, Craig, it's like, what path do you want kids to take to their seat? How do you want them to place their books on their table? How much noise are they going to be making on the way in? Are they going to be talking quietly? Are they going to be completely silent? You as a teacher need to be crystal clear, and ideally you as a school need to be crystal clear, because it's going to make it a lot easier, on what you want students to do. The second thing is you actually need to explain that to students, which is kind of self-evident based upon what I was saying before. But crucially, you need to explain the why. In the same way that when we teach students a concept, it's helpful to make at least an allusion to the relevance of it. No matter how small that might be, we want to explain to students why. And that could be something as simple as, I really care about your learning. By us coming in quickly and quietly, we're maximizing the learning time. It can be as simple as that, right? And we've got some scripts for that kind of thing in the book as well. The third thing is we want to model it. So, we were talking before about worked examples. We need worked examples for our students as well. We want to provide them with examples, and we want to provide them with non-examples. To your question about what do the most effective schools do, they actually use video for this. So they will pick a class who does this particularly well. They will take a film of it. Then they will show that film in assembly. They will show that film in tutor groups. They will get students to have discussions about what the students did and what they didn't do in both the examples and the non-examples. A picture paints 1,000 words, and I don't know how many words a video paints, but it's more than 1,000. So it helps kids to really see that. And without seeing it, they don't know what silent means. They don't know what calm and quiet means. We need to be concrete about that. Next, and I'm basically just going through an instructional sequence here, Craig, as I'm sure you and many listeners will notice as well. Next thing is we need to be checked for understanding. And so we can check for understanding with questioning. So we have everything in the book that we say check for behavioural understanding. So we might give instructions about, we're going to enter the class now. There's 3 things I want you to do. The first thing is I want you to enter silently, and so on and so forth. Following that, you might say, what is the first expectation? Pause, Craig. And I'm going to expect you, Craig, to be able to say, we need to enter silently. If you can't tell me what the first expectation is, you're not going to do it, right?
Yeah,
so the first thing we need to do is actually check that the kids have in their heads what they need to do. The next way we're going to be checking for understanding is through observation. So are the students actually doing it? If not, we can drill down. Is that a understanding issue, or is it just a compliance issue? And then we need to be responsive. We need to provide feedback and adapt instruction to address gaps, which is pretty obvious. And then a final one, and this is an interesting one, we actually need to return to those key principles and expectations over time. We should actually expect behaviour to slip. There's always going to be a push at the start of term, at the start of the year, for entry routines and so on. As a school, as a teacher, you should explicitly plan when you're going to revisit these concepts, and make sure that happens at crucial times. At the start of every term, there should be a reset of behavioural expectations. Something I used to do, I think I've probably talked to you, Craig, in a recent podcast. I used to use the software Anki with my classes early on. This is like a space practice software. Mixed in amongst the content questions, I had behaviour questions like, what are the 3 expectations when you enter the classroom? This was something I quizzed the kids on so that it stayed front of mind for them and got locked into their long-term memory. So we can be as strategic as that and actually interleave that content in with, or interweave. It's not really interleaving in the classical sense. Interweave that content in with the more academic content as well. So when we talk about treat behaviour as a curriculum, that's what we mean. We mean take all of the instructional principles of good teaching and apply them to the behavioural sphere.
Yeah, okay, love it. All right, let's dig into this all a little bit, if that's okay. So I visit lots of schools, and I see lots of lovely shiny posters around the room about these are our expectations in class, and then you watch what's actually happening in class, and it's essentially the opposite of all those expectations, because it doesn't matter how fancy the poster is, it doesn't matter how well written these expectations are. Again, if none of those things that you've talked about there are in place, it's going to be an absolute waste of time. So a couple of things that you said there that I think are particularly important. The check for understanding is absolutely massive. The check for understanding, building it into a retrieval schedule, I think is super, super smart. I don't know anyone who's doing that, right? I've talked about this in the past, like sticking it, I mean, I don't know what you think of this, but stick it into your do now. Question 3 on your do now. We didn't talk about this in our 5-hour do now deep dive, but stick question 3 into your do now. What are the 3 expectations of classroom entry in this class? Blah, 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 blah. Building in retrieval, super, super important. expecting a reset and planning for a reset, really important. Here's the thing I want to push you on a little bit, because I've been thinking about this a lot. So we know that if you just describe these behavior expectations, it's going to be a disaster because it's too abstract. We also know from research and our discussions and blah, 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 it's all well and good showing a positive example, but to really emphasize something, you want the positive and the negative so that the kids can draw the contrast between them. Now, that's all well and good when you're teaching kids what a polygon is. Show them a polygon, show them a non-polygon. Where it falls down a little bit ethically is where you're talking about behavior, right? Because it's one thing to show a video to all the teachers of a class behaving like a bloody dream. It's potentially something a bit different to show a video to all staff of a class where 2 or 3 kids are playing up a bit, because all of a sudden that's now outside of the confines of that classroom, particularly if there's something going on that's caused that behavior that day. And now all of a sudden that's been shown as the way not to behave in this school. And I think we run into a similar problem when we talk about examples and non-examples for CPD just generally. Okay, it's all well and good to show a teacher using amazing mini whiteboard routines. You show a teacher using shit mini whiteboard routines, that's not so great, even though it's going to be much more powerful in terms of driving that message home. So where do you stand there, Ol? Can schools really use non-examples in terms of behaviour to drive it up? Or rather, does the ethical considerations outweigh the pedagogical benefits?
Well, I'm in full favour of making naughty kids get tattoos that say naughty on their forearms, Craig, so I have no issue with that. No. To be serious, firstly, just a clarification, we are showing the videos to teachers, but we're also showing them to students. So just making sure that's really clear to listeners. Mm-hmm. And yeah, in terms of this ethical question, there's a really easy way around this. And shout out to Charles Community Primary School in Western Australia for helping me realise this. The non-examples are acted, and they're acted by teachers. And then kids have a great time talking about how their teachers were naughty, why they were naughty, exactly what they did wrong. Really, really easy way to do the non-examples in video.
Oh, interesting. So I've not seen that done. My immediate kind of red flag there is surface features. Are the kids not just thinking how weird it is for the teachers to be like playing the roles of kids? Are they actually focusing on the actual things you want them to focus on?
Yeah, you just have a discussion with success criteria and talk about how did Mr. Barton enter silently or not? How do you know? And just direct the conversation and reflection.
Interesting. And Mark, before I direct the next question to you, anything to add to what Ollie said there?
Yeah, I think just once you take that idea that behaviour is a curriculum, you really think about all the different parts of the class. One I see a lot is students paying attention. You guys have talked about this, but like, what does paying attention look like? A teacher might come in and say, listen up or pay attention. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not specific enough compared to eyes on me, nothing in your hands, no talking, thinking about what I'm saying. And the more clear you are on exactly what you want students to do, even if like how to disagree with one another is a really important skill that we need to teach explicitly with examples and non-examples. It opens up, the whole classroom as to how you really want it to look.
Love it. Fantastic. Right, Mark. Well, let's dig a bit deeper into this idea of behaviour as a curriculum. We often talk, when we talk about improving pedagogy, whether it be mini whiteboard routines, whether it be the do now, whether it be example problem pairs or whatever, there's kind of 3 levels that it can be implemented. One is an individual teacher thinking, all right, for my classes, this is how I'm going to do mini whiteboards. And that's going to work to a certain level. But of course, if they then go into English and they're using mini whiteboards completely differently, it's going to undermine the establishment of that routine. So your second level up is perhaps departmental level. And then your third level up is whole school level. So when we're talking about behaviour as a curriculum, obviously the ideal is that everyone in the school, every teacher is following this same curriculum. So that message gets reinforced and the kids get to rehearse it and so on and so forth. But if we've got teachers listening to this, or we've got heads of department listening to this who are thinking, right, I'd love to bring that just into my maths department. Is that feasible? Or we've got individual teachers listening to this thinking, okay, the rest of my department or school's not going to buy this, but I want to get into this. How effective is it going to be at that level?
I think it can be very effective at the department level. So if the head department says, in mathematics, this is how it looks, and you get the added benefit from year to year and from teacher to teacher, there's less variation, which means there's less new routines and rules for students to learn. So that makes it a bit easier. You can do it at an individual level. It's just harder than if it's done at a whole school level. But I think the real tension in this and going from a whole school level is to have some consistency across a whole school, teachers do have to give up some autonomy.
Yeah.
And when school leaders have introduced these ideas, actively naming that, saying, hey, I know your classroom management's great and the kids really enjoy your classes, but if you use similar routines, if you use mini whiteboards in the same way, you're really going to help the graduate teacher 3 doors down. You're really going to help your colleague who's teaching the year 10s period 6 Friday. Like, most reasonable teachers go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can do it for those reasons, rather than just feel like it's something that's imposed from them from the top.
That's fantastic. I'm going to discuss one more principle, but I'm just going to give you a heads up. What I'm going to do after I've discussed this principle is I'm going to ask you to just state the 10 principles, just to give listeners a bit of a teaser so that they can know. So if you want to just get that ready, that'd be great. Right, Mark, third principle I'd like to talk about. There's a reason I want to talk about this. Success is the greatest motivator. Now, I don't really post on Twitter anymore. And one of the reasons is one of my final interactions on Twitter was with this guy. I won't name him, but he's doing my head in, who was arguing about, no, success isn't motivating at all. No. Kids are motivated when they're not successful and all this nonsense. Whereas you read the research, it's very, very clear that if you want to get motivation, one of the best ways to do it is to secure success, as Peps McRae talks about it. But I've only ever thought about that in terms of academic success. So if you want kids to be motivated to learn maths, make them feel like successful mathematicians, and then you can get them through the struggle. But you talk about success is the greatest motivator in terms of behaviour. So again, I'm interested in that, but I'm very interested in it from a practical sense. What can teachers do to make kids feel successful behaviourally? So Mark, over to you on this one.
Yeah, so on a practical thing, one of the tools we use is positive narration. That's when you describe the positive behaviours you see in the classroom. So it might be, Craig's working silently, Ollie's sitting in his assigned seat, whatever he needs. And I think from a principal level, like, there's an old model of motivation which still kind of fits, which is, and we do this through this Positive Masculinity Foundation that we do some work with, that, like, if kids feel good about themselves, then they'll think good thoughts and then they'll work hard on the outcome. But, and that's your cognitive behavior therapy and the whole self-esteem movement. But like you're saying, it goes the other way around. Sometimes if students just do the outcome, actually, if you just pay attention, you'll be able to learn a thing. And then you'll think better thoughts about yourself, and then you'll feel good. So a lot of it does start with, if you do the action that you're supposed to do, you will succeed and feel good about yourself, as long as it's affirmed by someone who you value the relationship with. Then students will start to feel good about themselves. There's an academic paper, which I'm trying to remember the name of. It's something like student engagement and its association with academic achievement and subjective well-being, like a meta-analysis. But it kind of says kids who do the right thing in school both do better academically, but all feel better from a well-being perspective. Yeah. And so as teachers, sometimes just, making the kids do the right thing is actually really good for their academics, but also really good for their well-being. And it's okay as a teacher to say, yes, Craig, sit down, pay attention and do the work. Because if you do that, you're going to learn something. If you're going to learn something, you'll feel better.
Just to push you a little bit on this, Mark, so I'll tell you what I was thinking when I was reading this. And this might be the most obvious thing you've ever heard, or it might be the worst question you've ever heard. So let's lower your expectations here. But this, for me, it's still tied to kind of academic success, right? Because the message the dream you're trying to sell kids on here is, if you behave well, you will learn more. If you pay attention to me, and this is what paying attention looks like, then I will be able to teach you better and you will learn more and you will feel more successful. But of course, that's tied into effective pedagogy, right? Because what you don't want is you don't want a load of kids who are behaving immaculately, but then you're teaching them in a terrible way, right? Like, you're giving them a really poor explanation. You're not doing checking for understanding. Your activities you're giving them to consolidate their understanding are mismatched to the worked example. So there's a danger, I think, that we think, right, let's get this behavior curriculum nailed. But if that's at the expense of the effective pedagogy, then actually kids don't feel successful, because the effort they're putting in, and sometimes for some kids, it is significant effort. The effort they're having to put in to behave the way they're expected. If they don't see the payoff for that, then where's their incentive to do it?
Yeah, I agree. And I think they have to kind of go in lockstep a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So you need the engagement, the attention, the behavior, and then you can teach them well, because if they're not listening, they're not going to learn from your teaching. But the same way, if you're not teaching well, if they're all sitting silently and you're not making sense, it's not going to work. I think like one of the questions to put back, like, is attention a skill that can be taught? Or is independent work time like a skill that can be taught? And if you think about it from a student perspective, they can learn how to pay attention for a longer period of time. Like that is a skill. And it's like, well done, students. We've managed to listen for 10 minutes now with lots of checks for understanding and opportunities for feedback. But you can build up that time across the term. And I think you notice that when we return from, the summer break and the students haven't sat quietly for an extended period of time for 6 or 7 weeks, they're right back at ground zero, or level zero, and you have to build it up. The same with the independent work. Lesson 1, you might get 7 minutes from them, but by the end of the term, you might get 25. And saying that success is really important. So, well done, students. We got 10 minutes today. Fantastic. All right, now let's talk about the next thing. We can build up these things over time, and students feel better when they're making progress.
Got it. Fantastic. Right, I want to turn it to. Oh, sorry, no. I've teed you up, and I was going to skip over it there. Right, so we've.
I might just add a bit to what you were.
Please, mate. Yeah, please do.
Couldn't agree more. We need to think about both of these things. The way that I would think about it, the way that we think about it at Step Lab is securing attention is a precondition for any learning. So you gave a great example of it before, Craig. You went to a school. You were a fantastic teacher. You went to a new school. Kids weren't listening. If kids aren't listening, they can't learn, regardless of how good you are as a teacher.
Yeah.
Think about it the other way around. If the teaching is mediocre, but kids are paying lots of attention, they will actually learn something, right?
Yeah.
It can't. The teacher can't be teaching completely wrong stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if the teacher's even a bit unclear, a bit muddled, it's not ideal. If the kids are paying, you've got really good kids paying attention, they will learn something. Other way around, it's not going to happen. So I would definitely say that securing attention is a precondition.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And on the diagram that Josh Goodrich has in responsive coaching, it's number 2, right? Securing attention before anything like the checking for understanding, the effective communication, the thinking hard, and so on. Yeah, that's
exactly. Number one curriculum. Like, make sure you're not teaching something that's incorrect. But once you've got that's locked in, yes, secure attention does come first.
That's great, fantastic. Right, I'll give us the big 10 then. These are your 10 principles, and again, I'll be honest, I went in skeptical. When I looked at the kind of contents, I thought, right, I've heard a lot of these before and it's going to be all abstract, airy-fairy nonsense. But hopefully, as we've conveyed in this last kind of half an hour chat about this, these are actually there's real concrete strategies behind this. Right, I'll give us the 10.
Great. Well, hopefully the first one is a bit of a new idea for people. Working out the order was a tricky one as well, but this is one of my favorite ones. Principle 1, cracking behavior is cracking a code, which is about your mindset in relation to classroom management. Principle 2, the best classroom managers have the best habits, which is about deliberate practice. Principle 3, beginning with high expectation provides more flexibility over time. Principle 4, master your own behaviour to influence others, which we've discussed. Principle 5, behaviour is a curriculum, treat it as such. Principle 6, it is what you say and how you say it. Principle 7, success is the greatest motivator. Principle 8, seek out examples of excellence, which was really formative for me in particular in understanding what classroom management is and how good it can be. Principle 9, students need to know they belong and that you believe in them. And principle 10, bank positivity.
Brilliant. We're going to give us some good teasers there for ones that we've not discussed. I'm always interested when people come up with top 10s, how that comes about, right? Because it'd be some luck if there was just exactly 10, right? Did you have more than 10 you had to cut down, or have you had to do a bit of padding out there? How did 10 come about there?
I honestly think it was just 10. I think we had 9 and then we thought of another one and thought, that's really important as well. It's added.
Leave it there.
It doesn't matter. You can say the top 8, like it doesn't really matter. Top 10 just got a bit of alliteration, so that's nice.
Yeah, 10's good. All right, love it. Right. Let's dive into my favourite part of the book, which is the scripts and exact phrases. Mark, I'm going to come to you on this. 2 questions, really. Was this always the plan? Like, how early in the kind of thought process of this book did you think, no, we need some scripts, some worked examples in here? And how do you hope these scripts will be used? What's the dream scenario?
Yeah, the scripts were the start of it, because we kind of wanted to, what do I do when, essentially, to answer the questions that graduate teachers that we were working with were saying, what do I do when a student does this? But then we realized that you can't just use all these tools and scripts without some knowledge of principles underpinning them. You can use a tool in the wrong way, essentially. And how do we hope that they're used? Well, they're essentially worked example. And like any work example, they give you a guide that people can use as a starting point to adapt, make changes, and edit. But it's a really good place to start in learning a new skill to see some examples in process. Like, what does a teacher say in this situation when a student says, some common things that they'll go say in a classroom?
Perfect. Right. Okay. So I've done the same kind of thing as I did with the principles. I've chosen 3, and I've done this a bit selfishly. I've chosen 3 that I struggled with for many, many years. And I'm hoping that other teachers, well, it sounds bad to say I'm hoping other teachers are struggling with them. But what I mean by that is I'm hoping these will be of interest to listeners as well. So the first example script I'd like to discuss is this idea of addressing non-compliance. And you have 2 features of this that I want to talk about. I'll first one for Mark and then the second one to Al. So directed choice with consequences. And I'll just read this bit out from the book, if that's okay. Then I'll hand over to you, Mark, to dig into this a bit deeper. For flat out refusal, calmly state choices and clear consequences. E.g., you can choose to move now, or we can follow this up after class, your choice. Well, why is this an important strategy, Mark?
I think it's really important because you're working with a power imbalance with students, particularly adolescents. Adolescents don't like to feel one down from a teacher. And so using this tool of directed choice actually puts the power back in the student's hands. So the way we say it is it's desired behaviour or consequence. So Craig, you can either focus on your work or you can see me after class. You can either focus on your work or I can make a phone call home to your parents, whatever it might be. And then you can say to the student, the choice is yours. I think that's really powerful because it's very different to a threat. A threat is, if you don't get back to work, I will kick you out of class. Or if you don't do this, I will contact your parents. It's a subtle shift in language, but it's a really big difference as to how the students respond to what you're doing. And this is what we found, like working with teachers. It's just those subtle differences in language that are difference between a fight that escalates between teacher and student, or one where the student moves calmly to where you want them and refocuses on their work.
Yeah, it's a biggie. And again, the reason I want to pick this up on is most behaviour books will mention this idea of choices, right? But it's so powerful. And the examples that you give and the wording you give, and particularly the point you made there about the subtle difference between a choice and a threat, is really important because it can sound like you're given a choice when you threaten them, right? That's the thing for me that hit home. But to a kid's ear, it's not. It's the teacher dictating what's going to happen. And again, as a little aside, I've 2 kids, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. The game-changing moment when I could give Isaac, the 6-year-old, choices and he understood what that meant, it was unbelievable. And it got to the point where when he was being a bit of a dick, he'd actually ask, and he knew he was in trouble, he'd say, can I have my choices? Can I have my choices? And I knew I was onto a winner. And Jacob, his 3-year-old brother, is just getting to the stage now where he's understanding choices. And it's just for behaviours an absolute game changer, the choice, for the reasons that you've said. Love that, Mark. Love that.
I literally did this like 1 hour ago with my daughter Ada. We were sitting down for dinner. She's 2 in a couple of months, and she was like, "No dinner, no dinner, no dinner." And I was like, "Okay, you don't have to have dinner, but you can either sit here have dinner with Mummy and Daddy, or you can play in the lounge room by yourself." I had to say it about 3 times.
Yeah.
And she was like, play in the lounge room. I was like, okay, but if you go to the lounge, you're playing by yourself. Mummy and Daddy are staying here. She was like, oh, dinner, right? So it's so powerful, and I use it every day and multiple times a day with Ada.
Yeah, great. Absolutely love it. Perfect. In this addressing non-compliance, there's another bit I'd like to talk to you about, if that's okay. This idea of a restorative ending. If I can do the same as I did with Mark, if I just read out the bit that kind of grabbed me from the book. Restorative ending, ensure you finish with an encouraging and restorative comment. And then, as I love about your book, you always then give an example. For example, you were focused last lesson. I know you can show me that again. Why is this ending so important, Al?
Well, for me, this was a really important learning because I had a misconception about what we as teachers are supposed to achieve in like a follow-up conversation. So imagine you're meeting with a student after class, you're having that follow-up conversation. For the first few years of my teaching, I had the incorrect belief, I now see it as being incorrect, that the purpose of that was to help make students feel bad about what they've done, right? If you can make the student feel bad about what they've done, they'll want to do better next time. I employed this technique. I made kids feel bad about themselves, and I saw a negative spiral of student behavior. But more importantly, I saw a negative spiral of my relationship with those students.
Right.
It wasn't until I had Tom Bennett on the podcast, and for listeners who have listened or do listen to that, you'll actually hear me in the podcast go, like, have a realization, because Tom helped me realize that actually, no, that's not the point at all. There are and this is kind of my adaptation of what Tom had to say. There were kind of 3 objectives in that conversation. 1, we want to give students an opportunity to reflect on what's happened. 2, we want to clarify the actual behavioural expectations. And 3, we want to maintain our positive relationship and particularly enhance their motivation for next time. And so that 3rd part is the part that I didn't understand the importance of. And so we just wanted to make sure that every teacher who reads this book knows that when you have a conversation with a student, that last part needs to be positive, forward-looking and hopeful for them, so that they know they can do better, and they know that you believe in them, that they can do better.
Interesting. And I guess as well, I mean, we talked about this a little bit when we were in Australia. This, is it peak end rule they call it as well? Like that bit is going to be the bit that kind of sticks with them, right? You know, they've been in your lesson for an hour, a load of things has happened, but that final moment, that conversation they have with you, that's probably going to be the most memorable thing from that experience that they take away. So if that is both positive and also directs their attention on the most important thing, then hopefully that's the bit that sticks. So yeah, love that. Really nice. Okay. Let's do another example. I could do these scripts all day long. I absolutely love reading these. I'll tell you what, it's going to split the crowd though, right? I mean, we know script, just generally, we know scripts in terms of, you know, lessons split the crowd. So scripts in terms of behavior. But again, I think it's the right choice. So anyway, example script 2 to discuss diffusing debate. Yeah, this is good. The reason I chose this one, this for me fits in the same kind of category and potentially sometimes as kids calling out, right? So like you ask a question and I'm about to ask Ollie, but Mark shouts out the answer. It's almost not, it doesn't on the face of it seem like it's the worst thing in the world because it's Mark being enthusiastic and so on. And it's a similar thing, I think, with the debate, because sometimes, you know, you can see it as the kids actually care, right? And maybe if they're debating potentially about the learning, they're thinking about that, but also maybe the behaviour. They're not just accepting what's being said. You know, they're kind of standing up for themselves a little bit and exerting a bit of independence. But just like Mark calling out in lesson is an absolute checking for understanding killer, in terms of the behaviour, culture and so on, this debating, I've seen it and done it, seen it spiral out of control so many times. So I really wanted to dig into this. So, Mark, I'll come to you for the first 2, if that's all right. So the first one is partial agreement. Acknowledge the student's point without agreeing to the premise that it negates the instruction. Now, I read that thinking, what? But then the example, and this is why you need those examples, it really cleared it up for me. So I'll just read that one more time. Acknowledge the student's point without agreeing to the premise that it negates the instruction. Here's your example. Maybe so, but we're talking about you and your work. Back to it. Thanks. Right. Talk to me about this, Mark. I think it's a biggie, this.
So a really common situation in classroom. Yeah. Let's say, I'll pick on Ollie. Let's say Ollie's talking instead of doing the work that he's supposed to do. So I might say, like, Ollie, I'll use describe and direct. Ollie, you're talking, focus on your work, thanks. If Ollie's anything like any of the students that I've seen in schools all over the world, he might say something like, other people we're talking to. Yeah. All right. What we want to avoid is, I don't care what other students are doing. Okay? So we use a partial agreement. So Ollie would say, other students we're talking to, say, maybe they were, but we're focused to be on you and your work, get back to it.
Interesting. Yeah.
I could throw out a few other examples that are really common.
Yeah, keep them coming. Keep them coming.
Students might say, oh, it wasn't me. So maybe it wasn't. Quiet, focus on your work. A different one is like, she'd say, oh, this work's boring. I used to go on this big, long-winded explanation as to why expanding brackets is a really essential skill for life in the modern world. The kids are like, oh, sir, yeah, this is boring. I'm like, it might be, but it's what we're working on now. So that little phrase, it might be, maybe so, that's a really useful tool to say, yep, I've heard what you said, but it's not changing what's happening. Get back to it. And it's amazing how often students go, oh, fair enough, and go back to it. It's a useful tool rather than saying, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, I don't disagree, yes, you do, fight, F you, now we're in the principal's office. No, we don't want any of that stuff.
Yeah, the bit that really interested me was, because it's a nice halfway house, right? Because I've definitely seen it go wrong when the teacher says, yeah, you're wrong, because then, as you say, it escalates. But also, you don't want to say you're right. Yeah. You don't want to say, yeah, this is absolutely boring as anything, because then the kid's like, all right, forget this. Or you don't want to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone else in the class is talking, but I'm talking to you. And the kid's, oh, well, why don't you go and talk to everyone else? The key for me is that partial agreement, the maybe bit. That feels like that's the key word in this, Mark, right?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And even like students might often say like, oh, I'll be good now. And you're like, yeah, you might be, but you need to move out the front. The other thing is you just really need to hold the line as the teacher, because as soon as a student debates with you and they win,
Yeah.
next time you say something, they're going to debate again. And the student next to them is
Yeah.
going to debate as well. And the whole class is going to debate when the homework's due and like, no, this isn't a debate. I hear what you're saying, but it's not changing the outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's just to go back to my analogy before with the kid calling out when you do a check for understanding. If you don't address that, you can bet any money in the world that kid's calling out again later that lesson, or another kid's going to call out. So if you don't get this debate thing right, yeah, it's just gonna happen again and again. Can I just ask you, Mark, a bit of follow up to that? You also have this the phrase "this isn't a debate," and you put this is a useful phrase to cut off argumentative conversations. Is that your kind of backup if this partial agreement doesn't work?
Yeah, I think one thing that's useful, like teachers should expect debate from students, particularly new teachers. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, the students debate and they get caught off guard. Ollie was given a perfect example there. One of the tools we use is restate calmly. Like, so you say like, okay, you can either focus on your work or you can move up the front. She's like, oh, I'll be good now. You can focus on your work or move up the front. The handout in front of the body works really well. Like, hold on. You say, look, this isn't a debate. Like having those different tools in your toolkit and rehearsing them and practicing them with a colleague so you can just run them as a routine whenever you get in a debate with a student is really powerful rather than having to think of it off the top of your head during class. It's way too hard. But yeah, restating calmly, giving them some take up time, putting the hand out, saying it's not a debate are all really useful tools.
That's good. I'll come to you all in a bit to just dig a bit more into take up time, but just pick up on something you said there, Mark. The thing I see a lot, right, and I did a lot, is the kid there who's saying, I promise I'll be good now, I promise I'll be good now. The easiest thing in the world to do that is say, okay, go on then, one more chance. It's the easiest thing in the world, but particularly if you know the kid, you're just delaying having to confront that debate, and it's probably going to be a bit worse in 5 minutes' time or something like that. So kind of, yeah, sticking to what you've said and moving them or whatever the consequences, yeah, but dealing with it in a partial agreement way, I think is really powerful. I like that. Ollie, you have a hand up.
Yeah, just to add to that, this isn't a debate. I was amazed when I started teaching how good some kids are at running rings around teachers. I had some kids in my class when I started out, and I was like, I don't know what's happening, but this kid's like right on top of me, and I feel like I'm in a corner. I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
It's like, but Miss allows me to use my headphones. Does she? Does she? Yeah, she lets me use her feet, and she also lets. Oh, really? Okay. Well, maybe. Is there a school rule? There's no. You're like, oh no. So just that may be so, but or that partially. But then that I just want to emphasize that phrase. This isn't a debate. It just really, really just cuts it off because the kids go, oh. That the teacher isn't playing this game with me. I've got nowhere to go. So I really encourage listeners to give that a crack next time they find themselves in that scenario. Practice it beforehand so it comes automatically because it is really powerful.
That's good. I'll take up time. You put in the book here, give time for compliance to avoid power struggles. You just talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, let's imagine a scenario in the yard where you're, we talk about picking up rubbish as one of our scenarios as well. But you walk up to a kid, there's a juice box next to them, and you say, pick that up. The kid, and you stand over them, right? The kid kind of like, if they pick it up, they're like submitting to you, right? And so you put them in a really awkward position.
Yeah.
It create like I'm sure listeners can kind of imagine this dynamic where the student's sitting down, the teacher's standing over them, and the student doesn't want to do it just for the fact that them doing it is giving in. So the idea of take up time is you don't create that dynamic. You actually just say something like, "Oh, if you could grab that juice box, that'd be great," and you walk away, give them that take up time. In the classroom, if it's a bit more serious, you might actually want to provide a time limit. So you've asked a student to move and you say, Craig, to the front of the class, thanks. You've got 30 seconds. and you walk away. Then you can kind of save face. You can kind of shuffle. You can kind of kick the chair quietly. You can look grumpy, give your mate, roll your eyes at your mate, whatever. But you can comply. Whereas if I say move to the class, Craig, and I stand there looking over you, suddenly like you do not want to do that. So that's the first thing. Back to the rubbish example. There's other things we can add in. So we can kind of add. We can like assume the best of the student. So we can say, oh, I know that juice box probably isn't yours, but if you grab that, that'd be great. Walk away. Or even better, I know that juice box probably isn't yours, but if you could give me a hand keeping the school looking great, that'd be awesome. I'll pick up this piece of foil. You go pick up the piece of foil. And I'm, hat tip to Bryn Humberstone for teaching me some great lessons about schoolyard management like that, and some other ones that we've included in the book as well. So yeah, that idea of take up time just really diffuses that power dynamic and can allow students to still feel in control whilst also complying.
I love it. I love it. My only kind of kickback I thought when I was thinking about this is that the timer in the classroom is an interesting one, right? So, 30 seconds to do this. If it's a visible timer, you're asking for a bit of trouble, right? Because the kid is going to leave it till 3, 2, 1, just like little kids do just generally. But it's just the advantage of, and I hear everything you're saying, all, but the advantage of dealing with it there and then with no take-up time is it's done and you can move on cognitively to thinking about something else. The disadvantage, of course, is if you say do it in 30 seconds, during that 30 seconds, you're going to have moved on to something else, but you've still got to keep this in your mind that I've asked this kid, when's 30 seconds up and blah, 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 blah. So is there kind of like a working memory issue here? Or would you kind of jot it on a piece of paper, or do you reckon I'm overthinking this a bit?
There is a working memory burden. I would say the benefit vastly outweighs that working memory burden. And I would encourage listeners to run an experiment and, try either standing over a kid and saying, move to the front now, or saying, do it in 30 seconds. And from my experience, I'm confident that one's going to work better than the other. But I think you make a good point there as well, Craig.
All right, nice one.
Can I add a little?
Mark wants to add something.
Yeah, go Mark.
Can I say on that 30 seconds, let's say you're moving a student. So, Craig, you can either move up the front or I can speak to you up the class. You've got 30 seconds to make your choice. And you can even add, and I know you'll make the right one. It's just a nice little positive thing to throw onto the end of it. And then you walk around, you help another student. And as soon as you see the student moving, I go, thanks very much, Craig. I'll be there to help you with the work in a minute or so. Just a few of those little positive things at the end can help shift the dynamic from you're in trouble because I'm the boss to, look, you've made a mistake, but you're going to fix it. And I know things are going to be right.
And just on this, just before we move on to the third one, and I'll come to you on this all, and then get Mark to take as well. Is all of this, so the things we've discussed, the addressing non-compliance and the diffusing debate, are all these techniques built on the assumption that essentially kids want to do the right thing, whether it be because of social norms or because everyone's naturally a people pleaser, or is it because they want to avoid the sanction that comes with it? Is one more powerful in terms of drive than the other, Al, do you think? And does it even matter?
Well, first of all, I don't know the answer to your question, so I'm just going to speculate here. I would say that what these strategies do is they maximize the mileage you're going to get out of the student's natural inclination to comply.
Right.
If you created a situation where you say, move to the front now, and you're standing over a kid, even a kid who would comply if given time may refuse to just because of the dynamic you've set up. So by using these strategies, you're maximizing the mileage you're going to get out of their natural inclination. That's without the consequences. Then we can kind of step it up, and if they haven't moved, and we go through these scenarios in the book. What about when you give them take up time, they don't move? Then we can move to something like directed choice. Craig, I asked you to move and you haven't. You can either move right now, or we can have a discussion after class, right? So there's these kind of levels that you can go to.
Got it. Anything to add to that, Mark, before we move on to the third script?
No, I agree with Ollie. It's just we're trying to increase the likelihood of students doing what we want them to do in the class.
Love it. Perfect. Right. Oh, Ollie, back again. Go on. One
more thing. This idea of take-up time isn't just for students as well. This is actually something that can be helpful for managers. So if you're in a scenario where you're trying to have a subordinate, I guess to use it for want of a better word, do something, change something, if you're sitting in a meeting with them, you have a discussion with them and say, so are you going to do your entry routine better next time? what sort of a dynamic does that set up, right? Whereas you say, thanks so much for your time today. I'll just leave that with you. Looking forward to touching base with you later this week, right? Sets up a complete, like that's take-up time. That's what take-up time is. So it works in the classroom, works with your kids at home, or can work in management situations as well.
Love it. Fantastic. Right. Okay, everybody. Third and final script. And I had to choose this one, right? So we're going to talk about the independent practice, or what's typically called the you do phase of a lesson. Now, the reason I've chosen this one out of all the ones we could have done is I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and we'll talk about this all whenever we get to it in our monthly pods. But I recently delivered 2 hours of CPD about the transition from the we do to the you do phase. So the we do, where the kids are doing mini whiteboards or tick trick or whatever, to the you do phase, where we want them to sit down and do some potentially silent, but certainly kind of independent consolidation work. And that 2 hours of CPD didn't touch even for a second on the choice of consolidation work or anything like that. It was purely about managing that transition between the we do and the independent practice phase. And the reason being is every single lesson I see, whether you describe it as participation ratio or proportion of kids engaged or proportion of kids on task, it plummets after the we do phase, because kids see, I'm generalizing here, but many kids see the independent practice phase, particularly the transition to it, as an opportunity to take a cognitive break and an opportunity to have a little chat to their mate, a little opportunity to muck around a little bit, perhaps they've dropped the pen on the floor, blah, blah, blah. And then the teacher's trying to play catch up to get them back into it. So I think it's a bit of an underrated facet of a lesson, the actual behaviour during this phase of the lesson. I don't think it gets the attention it deserves. So that's just a bit of background why I wanted to talk about it. So we'll come to you, Mark, on the first few of these, and we'll hand over to Al for the last one. So the first thing you talk about for this independent practice phase is a timer. And you say it's crucial for focusing students and providing a clear work delineation. Do you want to talk to me about this, Mark, the timer?
Yeah, so let's say you've finished the we do and you're setting students towards the independent work. A timer will just be something, all right, by yourself and in silence, begin question 7, go. And then you start the timer. A couple of things on that. You can tell students how long they're working for. You've got 12 minutes to finish this. And it's useful as you walk around the class for students to be started. And let's say a student hasn't got started straight away. You can say, hey, Craig, look, it's been 2 minutes and you've only written the first question. Let's get back to it now. So it just like you say, it's that delineation between listen to the teacher to focus on independent work.
Ollie.
To add to that, if there's 50 minutes left in the lesson and you say to students, okay, now silent work, they're wondering, man, how long do I have to be silent for? Mm-hmm. Right? Whereas if there's a timer on the board saying 6 minutes, 12 minutes, they can keep on checking it, even if they're not doing their work, but they can be silent and keep checking and go, oh, when do I get to have a breather? It's kind of like when I was trying to keep up with you on park run, Craig. I could see the finish line, and so I put in a sprint. If I couldn't see the finish line and I was putting in a sprint, I'd just give up straight away, because I'd be like, I'm knackered. I don't know how long I can keep this up, and I don't know how long it's going to go, so I may as well give up now. So there's also that kind of motivational benefit. If kids know how long they need to be really focused for, that helps them to maintain that focus.
Interesting. Now, your argument, of course, against a timer is that you lose all flexibility, right? So you've put a 6-minute timer up, but all of a sudden kids need 10 minutes, or perhaps a bit more problematic, kids have finished after 3 minutes or whatever. Again, are we happy enough that the potential cost for that is outweighed by the benefits of the timer? Mark?
Yeah, I think so, because you can always adjust the timer. Let's say the students are finishing it really quickly. I can say, actually, we're going to have 6 minutes, or a few students are taking a bit longer. We can have it a little bit, give them a bit more time. I think one other thing on the timer is that transition to when you say go, and start the timer. Quite often students will start talking or have that mental rest. So The tool we use is called correct instantly, like plan for that. So when you say ready, set, go, like half a second after you say go, some students will start talking. And as a teacher, you can even be a bit more stern and say silently, thank you, and just raise your voice a little bit, because you know it's going to happen. The students go, oh, the teacher means silence. You're like, yeah, well, we do. So just a useful way to emphasize the transition and your expectations.
Love it. Right, this is the bit I want to dig into, Mark, a bit deeper. So let's come to you first on this one. The next thing you talk about is this idea of scanning non-verbal close talk proximity. And you say proactive and discrete methods to keep students on task. Do you want to just talk about a few of these and where they fit following this kind of starting of the timer?
Yeah, so these tools, like naming these tools, is something that I think was really useful in the book because it's what we saw the master teachers do. But
Hmm.
if you had have asked me in that first day teaching, name 10 behavior management
Yeah.
tools, I wouldn't have had a name for them. And so, like, scanning is where, and I think it's a Doug Lemov one, where you stand at the corner of the room so you can see the whole class and you're actually scanning to see who is looking. So that's kind of your phase one. As soon as you set
Hmm.
students to work, you can stand there. And then if students aren't working, and these are the things you see teachers do all the time, then your next step is, all right, I'll dig into my toolkit and I'll pull out a nonverbal, which might
Yeah.
be a open your books, move the hand for start writing, close your laptop, all the things that you can see. But that's your level 2. If that's still not working, maybe as a teacher you want to walk around the room and use a close talk and say, Craig, you haven't started, focus on your work. All right. And all of those tools are far more beneficial than calling out across the room, hey, Craig, get to work. Why haven't you started yet? How many times do I have to tell you? All those things actually add to the disruptions from the lesson. But having these 4 or 5 of tools is a really powerful thing, particularly for those graduate teachers we're talking about, because they can run them as a routine and help settle the class.
Yeah, I love this. I think it's massively underrated, this. I'll add 2 things to this for you to comment on, Mark, if that's okay. Um, I think a mistake a lot of teachers make, and I put myself firmly into this camp as well, is when they set students off on task, they immediately start circulating around the room. They go amongst the students. And it sounds like it's good practice, right? Because you definitely don't want to do the opposite, which is to never circulate. And I see a lot of teachers who are just rooted to their desk at all times. But the problem with circulating straight away is you essentially become the center of the kids' attention, right? And you're kind of walking around, and so straight away you're losing your vision of the rest of the class. You're being potentially an object of distraction. It makes it much easier for kids to have a little chat and take their time and so on. So it took me a long time to develop this and to get good. Well, I'm not saying I'm good at it, but just holding back, as you say, positioning yourself, whether you call it pastor's perch or whatever, position in the room where you've got your peripheral vision, you can see all your students, really important. And then the other thing that I learned from Adam Boxer, and this is even harder, is he calls it golden silence. So to try and get the room in the state where that silent, focused atmosphere is robust and not fragile. And the longer you can keep silent yourself, the more likely that is to happen. So exactly as you say, starting with the non-verbals and hoping that does the job. And if that doesn't do the job, ramping it up a little bit to a quiet word with a student. Because the longer you can build up that silence, and as the seconds tick by, the silence becomes more and more robust. That means that if you do have to intervene or you do have to circulate, you're not going to shatter the silence for the rest of the class. So those 2 things, that idea of not circulating immediately and trying to build up this golden silence, I think are really important. And Mark, to comment, and then Ollie, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, building on that silence idea, like often a student will ask for help and they'll ask in a normal loud voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if the teacher replies to that answer in a soft whisper, then the student will actually speak in a whisper again. They'll mirror it for some reason. And probably the 2 non-examples of this are, let's say, everyone by yourself and in silence, begin the work, go. And the teacher says, oh, and while you're working on that, make sure you pay special attention. Don't forget to, which is, the non-example. Or one I've heard called the siren song of teaching. Everyone get to work, go. And a great student up the front puts their hands up because they want help. And as a teacher, you're like, oh, a kid wants help. It's my job to help kids. Great, let's do it. Instead of saying, oh, I know you want help. I'm just going to wait until everyone started. Reread the question again, and I'll be with you in a couple of minutes. Because if they go straight away, the class isn't settled, and then the teacher's like, you 3 up the back, get to work, I'll be over there to help you out. There's some of the common non-examples that we see and try to avoid when we're coaching teachers.
Fantastic. Ollie, anything to add to that bit, mate?
Mark's covered it well.
Mark's covered it up. Perfect. And next bit in this, there's 5 in this. So just to recap, we've done the idea of the timer, then we've done this combo of scanning, non-verbal, close talk. And third one is directed choice to escalate off-task behaviour. So Mark, is this coming back to what we talked about before? And this is your kind of the next level up. If the non-verbals haven't worked, if the close talk hasn't worked, we're back to this idea of choice. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's it. And it can start with, you can either focus on your work or you can move up the front. And let's say it doesn't work, you can either move up in the front or you can see me after class. You can either see me after class, or I can have a conversation with your parents. I can have a conversation with the parents, or you and I can meet the head or the principal, whatever it is. But just having that tool in mind is a really powerful go-to for teachers, because it's not, like we said, it's not a threat, but practicing those statements is a really useful habit for teachers to get into.
I'm going to ask you a terrible question, right? Because it's an important question, but it's one that's impossible to answer. When do we get to the stage where it's just more manageable just to stop the whole class versus having these directed choice conversations with one or two or three kids? Where's the tipping point here?
Yeah, I think if, like, there's a couple of things. If people say anything, like they do something violent, they say something sexist or racist or whatever, you can still use the tool describe and direct. And so describe to say what happens. Like, that is sexist language, and we do not accept that in this classroom. Okay. And then, quite often students might laugh at that. And you can use another phrase like, and I wouldn't expect anyone in this class to find that funny. That often kind of calms it down. And then you can describe and direct, like, Craig, that was inappropriate, or that was violent. Step outside. I'll talk to you in 30 seconds. Right. So just having it's the same tools. It's describe and direct, or it's directed choice, but you can use them in lots of different scenarios. So.
And if we've got what I'm thinking of in particular is we've got 7 or 8 kids who are not doing what you've expected them to do, right? And what we can't be doing is kind of giving Ollie a choice, then we're giving Mark a choice, then we're giving Emma a choice, we're giving everyone choices, right? What stage do we reach that point, and what do we do in there? Does the idea of choice still work if we've got a critical mass of students not doing what we want them to do?
Yeah, if the noise level gets too loud in a class, I'd actually revert to a gaining attention routine. So, all right, everyone, you've got 30 seconds to finish what you're doing. Pens down, eyes this way, no talking, thank you. And then you can kind of do a whole reset. Great, I've got 70% of the front row looking this way quietly. The guys on the right are paying attention, just waiting on 1 or 2 more, everyone's silent. And then kind of, okay, here's what's going to happen now. So you'd use a different routine around gaining attention.
Got it. Perfect. Anything to add to that, mate? Happy enough. Perfect. Right. One more for you, Mark, and then back to Ollie. The other thing I really liked is this idea of preempting issues. So you say have spare materials ready. So, for example, put your hand up if you've forgotten a pen or paper. Now, again, one of the other reasons I don't post on Twitter anymore is I don't know if you remember Pengate. It was all kicking off where it was teachers arguing, should you give kids a pen if they've forgotten a pen? And for some, it was like the worst crime in the world. Others were like, it was a crime if you didn't give them a pen, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to go down that road. But what I'm particularly interested in is this idea of, exactly as you say, preempting what could go wrong and deal, and having a plan to deal with it. Just talk to me about this, Mark, if that's all right.
Yeah, if I ask a teacher what's going to happen in their classroom, teachers are pretty smart. Like, they know who's going to be late. They know who's going to forget materials. They know who's going to call out. And so in coaching, we create a plan for it. And I think it's really useful to have half a dozen spare pens, a couple of blank sheets of paper. Lesson 1 at the start of the year, 2 students or 5 students have transferred from another school and they don't have the textbook. So you're going to need the resources, and just thinking through a few of those things makes it so much smoother for a classroom. So it's a really simple question for a teacher. Like, what might go wrong? This. All right, let's plan for it.
Mm-hmm. And I think the important thing there that often gets lost, right, is you can give out the pen in the moment and then you can deal with the consequences later. If there's a sanction or whatever that needs to be done, or a conversation, but it doesn't necessarily need to happen there in the moment. I've seen lots of lessons derailed by a 5-minute debate about because the kid hasn't got the pen, or the pen's broken, or it ran out, and blah, 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 blah. I guess, would that be an important point, Mark?
Yeah, the underlying principle is just trying to maximize learning. I don't want to have a 5-minute conversation. I can't believe you don't have a pen. You're 16. Yeah. Of course you. How many times? Yeah. Like, here's a pen, do the work. And also at the end of class, when they give me the pen back, I'm like, hey, Craig, this is the second lesson you haven't got a pen. Mm-hmm. You don't have it tomorrow. You and I are going to have a conversation after class, or whatever it is we need to do. Yeah.
Got it. Fantastic. Ollie, Lovell.
Two other interesting tidbits about lending pens, just to re-enter Pengate. One's from a venerable educator and one's from a grad. So Lee Schulman, in one of his books, he recommends if you have resources for students to use, make them like slightly inconvenient resources. So he says collect up all your pencil stubs when they get to about 3 or 4 centimeters long, and that's what you lend to kids. It's just like it's enough for them to get their work done, but it's a
Yeah.
deterrent to not bring a pen for themselves the next time. And I don't know if people want to try this or not. There's kind of extraneous load potential outcomes of this, but a big issue for lots of teachers is when they lend a resource to a student, it won't come back. It'll just
Yeah.
end up off the kid's pocket. This teacher said, whenever I give out a pen, in exchange I take one of the student's shoes. And he said, I've never lost a pen. So if you are having that issue of losing pens, depending upon the funk that comes off the socks of your students, that or an alternative, taking something else that's theirs as a temporary trade to the end of the lesson may be a strategy that you like to try. Like I said, potentially some extraneous load. There's a laugh from the class, blah blah blah. But if it's done subtly, I think that may be a strategy that people want to have a play with.
I heard kind of like a lesser version of the taking the shoe. Isaac had a cover teacher. Isaac's my 6-year-old. And they were dishing out glues, and they gave each of the glues a name, which was quite good, right? So if you had like Emma or Lucy glue or Mo glue or whatever, and the teacher knew all the names of the glues, like, right, Emma's missing, where's Emma? And there's something about like humanizing that glue a little bit, which meant the kids were taking a bit more care over it. Who knows? So you're dishing out, the Ollie pen today, whatever. So maybe there's something in that. But go for the
Where's
shoe.
Emma?
I like the shoe.
Where's Emma? I killed her. She's dead.
Exactly.
I cut her off. I cut her with my scissors and threw her in the bin.
Exactly.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, what
kind
could
of
go wrong? What could go wrong? Perfect. The final bit just on this section here was this, and Mark touched upon it a little bit, but this highlighting collective nature. So when students ask for help before everyone else has started, gently redirect. I just need to make sure everyone's started before I get to you. This is your other one. It's not bad behaviour in the stereotypical way, right? It's a kid who's stuck on something, so the hand goes up. And there's lots of reasons why that hand may go up. It could be a sense that your explanation's not been great or the work's mismatched and so on. But focusing on the behaviour aspect, it's a difficult one to deal with because lots of teachers' instinct is going to be to go and help that kid, but it potentially could shatter this golden silence. So just talk to me about that, Al.
Yeah, well, I think Mark did a good job of using that phrase before. It's kind of siren song of teaching. When we see a hand go up, we just want to help. Yeah. There's probably not that much I'm going to add that Mark hasn't said already, other than maybe within that, when that short exchange with that student, you just want to reiterate why, so something like, hold on, Craig, just give me a moment. I'm just going to make sure everyone has started so we all get a good start on our work. Something simple like that can be worth thinking about as well.
Got it. Fantastic. Now, I've just touched upon 3 scripts. There are, I don't know how many scripts there are in the book, but there's a load of them, right? And again, it's not what I liked about it. It's not just do this script and everything's going to be rosy. It's try this, and then if this goes wrong, here's a little follow-up you can do and so on. I thought it was fantastic. My favourite part of the book by a long way. So really, really good. Right, let's bring it together with 3 reflection questions. 2 for Mark, 1 for Ollie. We'll do it as a sandwich. So we'll go for Mark first. What would an intelligent critic of your book say about it, Mark?
Probably a couple of comments we've had from intelligent critics. One is like, this is all just common sense, which I think we take as a compliment. And the other one says like, there's more to behaviour management than what's in your book. And I think that's true as well. We tried to write a really short, can read it in an hour and a half guide for beginning teachers. Human behaviour is far more complex than that, but we've just tried to be as succinct as possible and give people some really useful information. So that's a really fair criticism, I'd say.
Common sense one's always an interesting one, right? Because I get this a lot, right? And it's the hardest barrier to overcome. If a teacher thinks, well, everything you're saying is just common sense, they just stop listening, right? Because they're like, oh, I do this, it's obvious, blah, blah, blah. And you can guarantee they miss something, right? So your best case scenario there, that's a reader who is a behavior expert, who's nailed everything and knows all the strategies in your book, or who has viable alternative strategies that they've found work consistently. Your worst case scenario, which I think is probably more likely, is your teacher who's struggling with behavior, but for whatever reason kind of glosses over some of these strategies and thinks, oh yeah, but that's obvious, but it's not working for my kids and so on. Do you see that as a problem, Mark?
Yeah, I think it is. Particularly globally, a lot of teachers are leaving the profession. Behaviour's hard. There's lots of unfilled teaching jobs. And I think if every teacher was a master behaviour manager, I don't think we would have a problem. So this is why people are still learning this and still interested in, and why the book's been popular, I think, because people are still looking for ways to keep engaging their students in a class.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, just to emphasize, it's certainly not all common sense. There's some absolute nuggets, not just kind of one-off nuggets in there, but yeah, logical flows of things and yeah, philosophies you can build in. Yeah, fantastic. Right, let's return to one of our favourite themes of our conversations over the last few years, this idea of centrally planned kind of resources and curricula. So you've made the point that you should teach behaviour as a curriculum, which I think is a very valid point. You give them some concrete ideas for that. As I alluded to earlier on in the conversation, if you're a novice teacher, or even if a fairly experienced teacher, you've quite a few things to be grappling with. You've got your own subject knowledge, which some teachers we can kind of take as read, but for some teachers, particularly if they're new to the subject or whatever, they've got to put some work into just making sure they can do, in our case, the maths for it. Then you've got your pedagogical knowledge of how to plan a lesson. When's an appropriate time to check for understanding? What's a good check for understanding look like? What's a good response to that check for understanding? What does good retrieval practice look like? And blah, blah, blah. And then on top of that, what we're arguing in this conversation is we need to get good at learning the behaviour curriculum as well. So is this your kind of black and white argument for at least taking one of those burdens off in terms of the kind of centrally planned pedagogical curriculum? So let's have high quality PowerPoints. Let's have points in that lesson where we check for understanding. Let's say that we're going to check for understanding using mini whiteboards. Let's say that if fewer than 80% of your kids get it right, let's go down this route so that the teachers can concentrate on nailing the behaviour curriculum before they start to build in the pedagogy side.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's clear to listeners from their own experience and from your explanation there of how many things a teacher, and particularly a beginning teacher, is juggling at a time. Like, teaching is an incredibly demanding profession. And I'll return to a principle that I talked about earlier: novices benefit from worked examples. The more worked examples we can provide people with in all domains, both in the kind of content domain, but also the classroom management domain, the more successful people are likely to be. And so, yeah, ease the burden by providing those lesson plans, ease the burden by providing scripts, ease the burden by making sure that they start to develop the productive habits outside of class through deliberate practice. All of these things are really going to help beginning teachers.
So here's your obvious kickback. I'm going to have to push you a bit on this, because I get this a lot, right? So in fact, I've been showing people the samples you've got of the explicit maths program on the website. And it's split in opinion, right? Some teachers think it's the best thing they've ever seen in their life. Some teachers are like, what the hell is that? You want me to be a robot in the lesson, blah, 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 blah. So for listeners who aren't aware, this is Ollie and his colleagues have worked on this scripted, essentially fully scripted, fully resourced curriculum for younger primary years. And it's fantastic. You can find some really, really interesting samples. So your obvious kickback is if you're giving fully resourced teaching curriculum and essentially a fully resourced behaviour curriculum in terms of here are scripts for various scenarios, teachers aren't doing any thinking themselves. They're not going to get any better. And what you're hoping for is that kids, somehow some magic things can happen where teachers are going to develop their mental models for what effective teaching and behaviour looks like. But they're not, because they're not cognitively engaged themselves. They're just turning to page 34 of your book or whatever and following this script and then doing slide 7 on this PowerPoint and doing that. So for teacher development, it's not a good thing. Well, what's the argument against that?
Cool. A few things here. So first of all, if the teachers don't have good mental models around effective teaching to start off with, then not giving them models of good teaching is not going to help them develop those mental models, right? They may.
But we didn't have first, all right. I don't think I agree with you there. Like, again, you're annoyingly young, as we've picked up on, but there's a whole cohort of teachers who are my age who spent 5-10 years without good mental models of teaching because we didn't have structured curriculums, we didn't have cognitive science, we didn't have all that thing, and we just muddled our way through. And we got those mental models took 10 years to develop or whatever, 5 years to develop, but they developed over time and they were pretty robust when they got there. And so I think it's not quite fair to phrase it as black and white as that. Because the argument it would go, you develop a better mental model if you kind of do it yourself, potentially.
I guess I agree in part with some of what you said. However, I'd like to push back on it. You wrote a book called How I Wish I'd Taught Maths, which is about how for like 10 years you floundered around and didn't develop mental models. And it was only when you started to actually talk with people, engage with the literature, and basically receive explicit instruction on what makes good teaching, that you develop those mental models. So I guess that would be my pushback on your pushback. I think that as we know from cognitive science, the most effective ways for novices to learn is through worked examples. That being said, worked examples alone probably aren't enough to help people really develop these mental models. I couldn't agree more. But I think we can kind of think of it in two ways. One is either they don't have the mental models. So there's a few things. Best thing we want to do is actually provide them with a resource and help them understand why the resource is designed that way, and help have them interrogate that resource. So that's the best case. Yeah. Next best case, well, one step down from that, but still good, is they don't have the mental models, but you give them a resource that helps them be successful. Because then you've got a teacher who hasn't got mental models, but they're being successful, right? And they will actually learn from those models as well. And we have lots of examples of that, and lots of teachers who have said, I feel like I know how to teach maths now. I'm actually, I feel like I could teach some of this without the scripts now, and so on and so forth. And then step down from that is they don't have the mental models and they don't have the resource. They're doing a bad job and they don't know why they're doing a bad job. So that'll be the first thing. The next thing is, when we provide models, we provide flexibility, right? A novice can use the model. An expert can consider the model and then make informed changes to that model. If you don't provide models, the novice struggles, the expert does okay, right? So it's like, take it or leave it, start with a model, they can always adapt it. And the third thing, and this is something I've been meaning to write a blog about for a couple of months, but I've just been extremely slack on the blogging front. Let's think about musicians. How do musicians get good at playing music? Do we say, you're going to be a musician, let's start, like, write a song. Write a song. Here's a song. This song should make people feel happy. It should be in the key of C major. Go. No, we don't. We say, okay, here are some fantastic songs that have been written by musicians in the past. Let's develop your technical abilities, your musicianship, and your sense of music through playing songs that experts have written. And once you've done that, you will understand how music works and you will be able to create some good songs, right? There are some savants who can write songs from the outset. There are some teachers who can write amazing curriculum resources from the outset, but they are by far and away the outliers. So I think if we think about, I think that's a really powerful analogy to think about scripts, or, in music, the power of scores, and the way that those worked examples and those kind of structures are really helpful for novices, and then experts can improvise on top of that.
Got it. All right. Love it. Love a pushback on a pushback, all. That's what we're famous for at this stage. That's good. Love it. Fantastic. Mark, let me, Joe, I'm going to do something here. So we're going to ask you the final question plan. Then I've just got a little bonus question that I'm going to throw into both of you just to try and catch you off guard and end on a low point, as I always like to do. So, Mark, what mistakes do you see senior leaders make when trying to establish a positive behaviour culture in their schools? We have lots of head teachers, assistant heads, behaviour curriculum leads listening to this show. What? Let's try and preempt. Let's do what Dylan William would call a pre-mortem. What can they do to stop things going wrong?
I think probably a couple of things. One, probably see a lot is like head teachers underestimating the challenge of behaviour and its impact on learning. So I think quite often the assigned authority of the head, they see a different school compared to the 25-year-old grad that I mentioned earlier. So that's probably part of it. And that's not through the fault of the leader. They just experience the school differently. But the main thing I see often there's no system. And so when we talk about systems, and we've got a little section on this in the book, is that schools need to really define their preferred behaviour management practices. So that's when the school says, this is what works here. And we've talked about some of those practices today. Another useful tool for schools, and something I think schools miss, is really leaning on their values and saying, if a student is doing something wrong, I can say, actually, Ollie, that goes against our school value of respect, or that goes against our school value of learning. So having those to tie, your behaviour standards to. And the other one is clarifying roles of what do you do with repeated low-level behaviour. And often the big challenge we see is not, like Craig mentioned, the kid throwing the chair out the window or the punch on in class. It's that repeated low-level stuff. It's the student who just mildly disrupts 6 lessons a day, every day, for 12 years and doesn't learn much and interrupts the learning of others, like that's the real behaviour challenge for a lot of schools and a lot of school leaders.
Fantastic. Anything to add to that, Al?
Yeah, and so just building on what Mark was saying, making sure that you actually have systems for tracking those things and they actually accumulate, because the accumulated impact of those low-level disruptions on learning is huge, and so the accumulated consequences must be commensurate with the impact. And without a really structured system, it's basically the follow-up isn't going to happen. Another thing to think about is, and this is something I've learned from visiting schools who do it well, thinking about the friction there is for teachers in actually recording these things. Because if something's hard, if I have to log into something that I've forgotten the password and I have to click through 15 things and write a big report on, this kid calling out in class, I'm just not going to do it. You need a really quick, efficient and lean system for teachers to record that, so it can, and then a systematic way of aggregating it, and then one person in charge of actually following that up and making sure that, these things are followed up and they don't just go through the keeper. So a few little additional things to think about there as well.
You both will have seen the same thing that I've seen. So what's big in the UK is this idea of like the consequence: C1, C2, C3, C4. So you do something wrong once, you get a C1. Do it twice, you get a C2. I walk into lessons and you've got on the board from the previous lesson, and you've got essentially every kid's name for some classes on the board. And some are on C1, some are on C2. Kids don't care, right? They don't care until it starts to get serious when you're in the C3s and C4s, because something potentially may happen there. But you've essentially 2 lives, 2 opportunities to just mess around whenever you want, because all that's going to happen is the teacher's going to write C1, C2. I've never seen that work at all. Do you have that in Oz? And surely that's a recipe for disaster. Who fancies that one? Mark?
Yeah, I think that, again, it's that challenge of that repeated low-level stuff, because if students know they can get in trouble twice before there's a consequence, sweet. I get 2 free hits every lesson, every day for my school year. So I think, like in teachers, finding a way to, if the behaviour is below standard, finding a way to track that. Even if it's below standard just once, you're like, hey, that's not on. Track it, even if there's no huge consequence, but just noting that it's happened. Because if you're below standard 6 times in a day, you're actually interrupting and cutting across the learning of a lot of students. And the schools that we've seen do this, manage behaviour well, track that really well.
And just to build on that, so I think it does make a lot of sense if you have a thing that, if you get 3 demerits in a class, then you're removed from that class, because in that given lesson, that's an issue. But also, just to emphasize, if you get 2, those 2 still count towards something. So if you get 7 in a week, then you have a meeting. If you get 15 in a term, then there's a consequence. So it does add up.
That's it. Love it. All right. Final curveball question for you. I'm obsessed with AI at the moment. Right. Everything I'm thinking about is the world of AI. So when I was reading your book, I was thinking of 3 potential AI uses for it. So what I'm interested in is your take on these, and also whether you foresee AI playing any additional role in behaviour management, classroom management going forward. So here's your easiest thing you do, right? You upload your PDF to some kind of LLM or whatever, like a nice closed system. And then teachers can essentially just have a chat to it. So like, I'm having trouble with this kid, he's calling out, what should I do? And then the spits back, have you tried this? And you have a conversation. There's option 1. You could do that today, right? If you wanted to. You charge people, $5 a month for it. Cut me in 10% for giving you the idea. Everyone's happy, right? There's option 1. Option 2, I think you could potentially have one where it's a more kind of checking for understanding. It's more professional development style thing, where you feed in your book and some other resources or whatever, and it's generating you written scenarios, examples and non-examples. What would be a good thing to do here? Option A, B, C, D, with real plausible distractors. So it becomes both a check for understanding, but also potentially a retrieval tool to remind you, and so on and so forth. So there's option 2. Option 3, and I don't think you could do this yet, but I don't think we're too far away, which is where, as Ollie says at the start, you video your lesson, and then of course the AI is doing the analysis of your lesson, and it's using your book, it's trained on that to pick out potential errors you've made, potential things you could have done better, and so on, so that when you review the footage, you're not reviewing it alone, you're reviewing it with prompts and so on and so forth. So are any of those, have you considered any of those, or do you think this is an AI should stay out of classroom management? It's not the realm for it. I'll go to Ollie first on this one, and then I'll come to you, Mark.
I think that AI can help with helping teachers to rehearse and do deliberate practice in terms of classroom management. Point one. Point two, watch this space, Craig.
Oh, Penny just leaving it at that. Just watch. He's dodgy, Ollie. Hey, look out, watch this space. Here we go. All right, okay. Mark, anything to add? You going to give anything cryptic there?
I'll try and be helpful.
I like it, yeah. I do like him better than you, Ollie. You were right. You were right.
Just like those students. No. Just saying, one of the things is that I think the lesson upload stuff could be really useful to collect some data around how many times did students call out? How many times did you correct an individual? Like, I don't even know what the exact parameters would be, but I think there is like you say, not yet, but somewhere down the track, you can get an analysis to help a coach. I don't think it's going to replace coaches and replace teachers, but to support coaches and teachers in having more information to analyze a class, I think there's a lot of potential there. We're toying with it a little bit, but it's nothing game-changing yet.
Got it. Fantastic. Right. Well, Ollie said we'd get it wrapped up in an hour. We've done an extra 45. That was an hour was never going to be enough. And we've only scratched the surface. We've just done 3 of the 10 principles and just 3 of the scripts. There's a hell of a lot more to dive into in the fantastic Classroom Management Handbook. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. But for now, let me thank my guests, Ollie Lovell and Mark Dowley. It's been fantastic speaking to you both.
Thanks very much, Craig. Thanks, all.
Thanks, Craig. And Craig, you always ask me if I've got anything to plug at the end, and today's the only day you haven't asked me.
The whole thing's a plug. The whole bloody thing's a plug. You've had an hour and 45. Christ, what are you plugging now?
If you're not a reader, we know that lots of people are too busy to read, and even a small book is challenging. And we also wanted to provide an easy way for people to actually rehearse these things. So there is an online version. If you'd rather an online version that works as either an online course or a kind of a podcast, because we've specifically designed it just so you can listen to it when you're driving, cleaning the house, whatever it might be. Go over the lessons over and over again. There is an online version, and we'll provide a link to that as well, which is roughly a very similar price to the book as well, if you prefer that approach.
There we go. Snuck it in at the end. Love it. There'll be links to all that and more in the show notes. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care. See you soon.